Okay, so what if I told you that the brutal history of physical slavery and a really heated debate happening in our schools today are connected? It sounds like a stretch, right? But our sources point to this powerful three-step pattern of exploitation that links them. And it all comes down to something absolutely fundamental: our human dignity. So let's start this journey with a piece of history that, honestly, most of us probably never learned about. It all kicks off with a question that you might not see coming.
So, were Irish people ever actually slaves? The answer from our sources is a resounding yes. And this isn't just some historical footnote. The real key here is the story of how it all went down, because it basically gives us a blueprint for exploitation. A blueprint that, as you'll see, pops up again somewhere you would never expect.
All right, so for hundreds of years, you had these pirates, the Barbary Corsairs, coming out of North Africa. And they were a force of pure terror along the coasts of Europe. We're talking about raids on ships, sure, but they would even storm entire towns, capturing people to be sold in slave markets.
And if you want to see just how devastating this was, look at this one single event. In 1631, these corsairs hit the small Irish village of Baltimore. They captured over 100 people, men, women, children, entire families. They were packed onto ships, taken to Algiers, and sold. And for nearly every single one of them, that was it. There was no going home.
Okay, so how does an event like that fit into the larger global picture? Well, to really get at the core logic here, our sources tell us we need to pull the camera back and look at how different systems of slavery operated all over the world.
Yeah, this map really says it all, doesn't it? It hammers home a key point from our sources. There isn't just one story of slavery, not at all. For centuries, you had multiple overlapping systems of chattel slavery, and that just means systems where people are legally treated like property, like livestock. And these systems were all running at the same time, targeting different people all across the globe.
Okay, this is where that pattern really starts to emerge. This chart breaks down three of the biggest slave trades. And yeah, of course they're different. Different timelines, different scales, they targeted different people. But what our sources argue is that if you can look past those surface-level differences, you find something startling. They're all built on the exact same fundamental logic.
And here it is. This is the shared logic. According to our sources, every single one of these systems, no matter where or when, was built on this three-step process. Step 1, coercion. The violent capture. Step 2, identity capture. This is where you legally redefine a human being as property. And step 3, a total loss of agency. You strip away every choice, every freedom, their entire voice.
So, we've seen how this system works to enslave the body. And this is where our whole explainer pivots. What happens when you take those exact same mechanisms and you use them to enslave the mind?
Right. This is where our sources make their most provocative connection. They argue that this three-step logic of exploitation, it's not some dusty relic of history. They say it's being used right now, today, not on a plantation or a galley ship, but in a totally different arena, the mind, and specifically, the minds of our children.
The argument being laid out here is that those same core mechanisms we just talked about, coercion, identity capture, and loss of agency, can be weaponized, not to break a person's back in a field, but to break their spirit inside a classroom, targeting their psychological well-being.
And this brings us to what is, without a doubt, the most controversial idea in our sources: the existence of a fourth system of exploitation. And they argue it's not historical, it's happening right now.
So what is it? It's defined as systemic emotional abuse. And the idea is this: it's what happens when educational practices are designed to frame children as guilty for things their ancestors may have done. Now, the sources are clear. This isn't just about one bad lesson plan. They argue that when this becomes widespread and gets baked into the curriculum, it stops being just bad teaching and becomes a form of systemic emotional harm.
And look at this. Here's how that exact same three-step pattern is said to apply in this new domain. Coercion, that's compelling confessions or assigning guilt to a whole group of kids. Identity capture, that's when you label a child an oppressor or an inheritor of guilt just because of who they are. And the loss of agency, that's when you silence their questions and demand compliance instead of encouraging real learning.
Okay, so let's put it all side by side. When you line up this modern system next to the historical ones, the argument is that the parallel in the underlying structure is undeniable. And in this version, the victims are children, kids who are being taught to feel ashamed of who they are. And the beneficiaries? Well, according to the sources, it's any ideological movement that values conformity over critical thinking.
So,
If that's the problem being laid out in the source material, what's the solution? Is there a way to push back? What do we do?
Well, the proposed antidote isn't to just ignore history or pretend the bad parts didn't happen. Not at all. It's about teaching it, but with integrity and with care for the children in the room. The goal is what the sources call true emancipation, freeing our kids from the psychological chains of guilt and shame that they never earned.
And this whole approach is built on a few really clear principles, all designed to empower students, not tear them down. First, teach the truth, but without blaming today's kids. Second, build empathy for everyone who's suffered, but without making anyone feel personally guilty. And third, focus on our responsibility for what we do today, not for what someone else did hundreds of years ago.
And this isn't just theory. It translates into a really practical guide for parents and teachers. The whole idea is to swap out the harmful stuff, like slapping labels on kids, with healthy alternatives. For instance, instead of a narrow view, teach the full global story of slavery as a shared human tragedy. And, just as important, focus on the incredible stories of resilience and resistance.
And for the kids themselves, the sources propose a freedom toolkit designed to build their own resilience. We're talking daily affirmations to build their sense of self-worth, critical thinking skills so they can recognize when shame is being used as a weapon, and practices that actually build real unity and respect among classmates.
It really all boils down to the simple but incredibly powerful idea from the Dignity Pledge for Learners. You're trying to arm children with an unshakable sense of ownership over who they are. My identity is mine, my dignity is mine, my voice matters. Imagine a kid who truly believes that. They can learn about even the darkest parts of history with clarity and confidence, instead of fear and shame.
And so that leaves us with the same big question our sources leave us with. We've seen how exploitation can be a shapeshifter, right? It evolves, it changes its form. So the final question isn't just for them, it's for all of us. If the ways people are exploited are always changing, then how must our fight to protect human dignity change and evolve right along with it?